throughout my whole life, ADHD was it was undiagnosed. I only knew what it was 3 years ago.
Sure.
And I've only come to learn a little bit more about it through my daughter.
Okay.
Who is in the business of neurodivergency, but it's only through trying to help her through some of her struggles that I've realized, my God, it's made me reevaluate my whole life. I just thought I was an idiot. It turns out, I was an idiot sometimes, obviously, but it turns out that my brain works in a certain way.
Mitch Sullivan, welcome to the Purpose-Led Leadership Podcast. I'm delighted to have you on the show. 50,000 connections. We've spoken before, a few years back, about retainers, actually. I've always loved your content. How I would describe you is that you take the piss, but nicely and in a very informative way. I hope that's okay. Tell me more.
Taking the piss is something I've got better at over the years, actually. Yeah.
Tell the audience a bit more, those that don't know, what you currently do.
Okay. I run a training business that I started 7 years ago. Well, a product. It's not a business because it still operates under my original company name. But it's it's very specific. It's a copywriting training course specifically for recruiters. That's kind of been successful pretty much from the get-go. And it's just ticking over nicely, gradually increasing quarter on quarter.
Yeah.
I kind of own that training niche in the UK. Although, to be fair, I created it because it didn't exist before I came along with this. So my next challenge now, time permitting, is to try and export it to the rest of the world, really.
Wow.
And obviously that means America and Canada more significantly. So yeah, I still do a bit of recruitment because I like to get my hand in. And it adds to my credibility as a trainer. So I probably fill 4 or 5 jobs a year.
Great.
Increasingly, more of them tend to be recruitment jobs because I have a big network of recruiters, particularly here in the UK. And I get involved in some marketing and advertising campaigns, again, off the back of the strength of that copywriting for a recruiter brand.
Yeah.
I'll occasionally get approached to produce ads or create ad campaigns. And I've got a team of creatives and copywriters that I go back to do that.
Great. I mean, my experience tells me that there's a huge market for your services because I think copywriting in itself, I'm sure you'll agree with this, is very underestimated. In fact, the quality of ad writing and JDs in general is pretty poor, would you say? Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to make a distinction between ads and JDs at some point. But yeah, it is and it isn't actually. In some ways, I think the rise of social media has made the creation of content more of an everyday thing. So I think more people who've got some natural ability at that have come to the fore.
Yeah.
Which is good. People have probably intuitively got better at writing or communicating what they want to express because of social media. However, the bad side is that I think a lot of recruiters or people in the recruitment industry have got locked into habits, which at its worst manifests itself in them regurgitating job descriptions and expecting them to behave like job ads.
Yes.
And that's really the battle that Jackie and I have been sort of waging over the last 7 years, is getting people to understand that the two are very, very different things that have very different purposes.
I think there's a lot of kind of copy and pasting and shortcutting going on in terms of...
Yeah, it's the most widely used technology in recruitment.
So what is the distinction? I mean, in your eyes, I think, because a lot of people wouldn't necessarily correlate that as a distinction.
No. Well, anyone who doesn't think there's a distinction between a job description and a job advert is, well, they're an idiot. Sorry, I'm thinking of a better way to put it. But, you know, they have two different job functions. You know, to distill it down to one word, a job ad's job is to sell and a job description's job is to tell. And that's it. One gives information, mechanical data about a job. It's driven by things like compliance and legal. A job ad is driven by sales and marketing, and it's there to encourage people to want to find out more.
Sure. Yeah. Let's go to the job description first, because you can qualify a job to the hilt, right? But just qualifying a binary criteria of what the person is not going to be enough. I mean, what's your understanding of what a good JD looks like?
I'm not an expert on JDs, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, and I don't really spend a lot of time looking at them, other than if I'm working and filling a job myself.
Right.
But my job as a recruiter is to distill the JD down to workable information that I can use when trying to attract the right types of people to that job. So all I can really comment on is the mistakes that get replicated in the job ad from the JD. But very few people want to read a job description on a job board.
Yeah.
Particularly at the moment, because most of the people looking at jobs on a job board are in a job. They're not unemployed, most of them. Even back when the economy was normal, according to data that I've seen, around 60% of all job board traffic was coming from people who were looking to improve their situation in some way.
Yeah.
So in other words, they were employed.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is that nobody's really going to want to read an 800-word job description on a job post if they're casually browsing.
Yes.
Because what they're looking for potentially is something that might be better than what they're doing. So if a piece of content doesn't make it easy for them to find that out really quickly, they're probably not going to invest time reading it. But however, people will read a job description, an 800-word, 900-word job description, if it's about a job they've already decided that they might be interested in.
Right.
Because then they're looking at the finer detail. Who are they reporting to? What are the key tasks or responsibilities? What are the essential criteria they need to have? What are the nice to haves that they might not have that they might have to learn? Then they'll have the motivation to look at it, but not before.
I think recruitment's changed more so in the last 2 years than it has in the last 10, specifically in the form of kind of introduction. So things like CVs, things like JDs, adverts, the way we even converse with our clients and our candidates has completely changed. I think the personal branding, the CV itself, the average recruiter only spends 6 or 7 seconds looking at a CV, right? So,
so they say. I'm not convinced that's a true statistic. Actually, 6 or 7 seconds is not long. I think it might be true of CVs that aren't going to get looked at all. Yeah. So in other words, it may take only 10 seconds to determine that a CV is not appropriate. So if you're filling a project manager job and what you're looking at is a CV for a gardener or a waiter, that can get done in under 10 seconds. But I think anything else, you need to take a little bit of a closer look. But I take your point that
if I was a hiring manager and I received a CV or I received a phone call, video, or some sort of creative way of introducing themselves, I would always go for the latter, because I think personality, behaviors, attitudes tends to trump skills and experience anyway. Would you say?
Depends on the job. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Depends. I don't think it trumps skills and knowledge and experience in a lot of tech roles or engineering roles or legal roles or finance and so on. But probably will in things like marketing, sales, customer service, jobs that are comms based. So it's nuanced.
So going back to your journey, I want to delve a bit deeper into that, and also go back into things like retainers and everything else. You say that you do recruitment, which I think is great. I think that's really important. I think, in whatever role you do, you tend to have to practice what you preach, right? But why did you choose the copywriting route that you're doing? And I know you've done some retainer courses as well. Why didn't you just do recruitment?
Okay. I decided 10, 11 odd years ago that I was going to move into coaching.
Right.
A lot of people do as they get older. Yeah. You get recruitment wears you out. It's a tough business. So I didn't want to have to rely on filling jobs to make my living.
Yeah.
I felt I'd accrued a lot of knowledge and experience and insight, which I felt would be valuable.
Yeah.
And always the two things that I've always considered myself most knowledgeable is retainers and recruitment advertising in general. I always felt I made the transition from contingency to retained in 2001. And I did it off the back of my ability to produce good advertising. So it was the fact that I would create much better advertising than any other recruiter in that market I was working in would be enough to get for me to justify the client paying me some money up front. And then, like anything, the more you do it, the more you learn how recruitment differs when you're working on retained as opposed to contingency. And the big difference is when somebody's giving you money up front, you pretty much have to fill that job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that then shows throws a different shade on activities like the brief, what kind of conversation you have with the hiring manager, and into what depth, in order to understand the job, so that so that you can fill it.
Yeah.
How am I going to sell the job? How am I going to assess the right candidates? And so you really need to get into some of the granular stuff with the client. You have to market the job well. You have to distribute that marketing in the right places. You can't rush candidates like you often will do in contingency, because you're under a lot of time pressure. You're competing with 2 or 3 other external agencies. But when you retain, you can just take a little bit more time, because some candidates need a bit more time. They don't want to be hassled. You need to be able to meet them as well, which is an important criteria of working retained. So, it changes. It significantly changes how you actually do the job. And what I learned from doing it is it made me a better recruiter. I became better at stuff that I'd always found tricky, such as assessing candidates. I still don't consider myself that good at it, but I'm better at it than I was, because I've had to get into some of the finer detail with certain candidates in order to justify me putting them on a shortlist.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the sector 25 years now. I've built my own massive business. I've sold that. I'm an NED to lots of different businesses now in recruitment. And some of my clients get the retainer piece, and they lean into it and they do it. And other clients, they either don't get it or they fear it. So what advice would you give
to the client or the recruiter?
To the recruiting business around, tackling, getting their team to get more exclusive business, get retained business versus just doing contingent?
I tend to advocate a more prudent approach to it. So any agency that would come to me and ask my advice on how to start making that transition, my first piece of advice was they would do it slowly, do it one piece at a time. Don't just go wholesale or gung-ho at it, which I know some agencies have done and will do.
Yeah,
that's up to them. But I don't think it's a smart way of going about it. Only allow your best recruiters to pitch it, because fundamentally what you're pitching is your ability to definitely fill a job.
Absolutely.
So if you can definitely fill a job, you can articulate all of those different parts of the process and how you are going to make a significant difference to the improvement of that part of the process, compared to, say, a typical contingency recruiter who isn't going to go into as much detail in the way the job's marketed, the way the candidates are assessed. And fundamentally, that's all recruitment is, by the way. This needs to be said here. Recruitment is only about 2 things: attraction and assessment. Everything else is in support of those 2 major activities. And that's what clients are paying for, in my view, is a recruiter's ability to be very good at attracting people to a job. So in other words, selling. And they've got to be very good at assessing who the right people are going to be, which is much harder, by the way.
There was a post from somebody on LinkedIn, someone relatively big on LinkedIn, sort of slating the sector around, saying we shouldn't charge any more than 10 or 15%. And I think a good retainer assignment, you're into it beginning with a 3, and just I think if you do it well, you can justify that, right? But I think there's a lot of negativity around what a good recruiter actually does and the value that it delivers.
Okay, the fee thing is interesting. It gets complicated a little bit. I used to be in that camp where I thought recruitment agency fees were too high. About 20 years ago. And I see a lot of my attitude then reflected in some people now on LinkedIn.
Sure.
And it's going to sound a bit patronizing, but I think you're going to grow out of that once you hit the harsh realities of the recruitment world kind of. But I used to think, wow, God, an agency's charging 25% of first year's salary. And some of the time all they're doing is flicking through some CVs. Pulling out 1 or 2, making 1 or 2 phone calls, getting one of them out of an interview, and that person getting the job. But recruitment doesn't really work like that often, but it can do. And I've had situations where that's happened, and I've built £20,000 off the back of doing maybe an hour and a half's work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
However, what the client is partly paying for is all that work I did in other times where I didn't earn any money.
100%.
One of which resulted in that candidate being in my Rolodex or my database or on my radar.
Your 20 years previous at work.
So So then, why are recruitment agency fees? I always see agency fees as being a standard 20%. For me, that's a fair number, regardless of the sector or the job discipline. And I don't necessarily see why somebody earning 250 grand a year should be subject to a 33% fee. Necessarily.
Right.
Although, when you're going after people earning at that level, there's probably, 50, 60 people in the country who could do that job. So the margin for error is much, much smaller, which means the emphasis on the recruiter knowing what they're doing is even greater than it might normally be. But the fees are what they are because that's the market rate, and we live in a capitalist society, and we have to be governed to a certain extent by market rates. The other thing that I think a lot of people forget is that even on retained, as a recruiter, you're still taking on a significant amount of risk
and time and effort.
I've taken on retainers where I haven't filled the job. Over the entirety of my career, it's probably no more than 10%. Probably a little bit less,
I think that's about right, isn't it?
It's somewhere around that sort of 7 to 10% figure. And at best, I've broken even.
I think you're right. It goes back to that mindset thing about if you're approaching a client with the right mindset and from an expert perspective, and you can deliver, why wouldn't you pitch a retainer? I think for me, you can have the right process, but if you're putting the client on a pedestal too much, or before you've even done anything, I think you're losing the.
Yeah, and look, there are other ways around it. I mean, it doesn't have to be, a third up front, a third when you deliver a shortlist, and the other third when an offer's made. I mean, I've always worked to a third up front and the balance on success.
Right. Okay.
Because the third up front gives me some budget to play with in terms of marketing. Hire copywriters. More recently, in the last 10 years, I've tended to use copywriters that rather than me producing the content, and they do it better. To be honest, it's some of the best money I spend. So I absorb all those costs, and I've got budget to play with. And it allows me the time to do the job better than how I would normally do it. But, I've had other situations with certain clients where I've given them a choice of saying, I can either charge you 20% of the first year's salary, which is going to be a fee of, let's say, £14,000, and you have to pay a third of that up front. Or another alternative is I'll charge you a flat fee of £9,000, which you have to pay, and I'll do exactly the same amount of work as I would have done on the retainer, and you pay half of it up front, the other half when the job's finished, and I will report to you everything that I've done with numbers, stats, CVs, everything else.
Ask you,
sometimes they choose that because it's less expensive.
In 3 simple lines, why would a client go for retained over contingency? What are the benefits?
Well, the quality of the work. They should be buying a much better process, a more thorough process, both in terms of how the job is sold and marketed, how it's distributed, how those candidates are treated, the kind of respect that they're afforded, and how they're assessed. And then the whole admin and bringing things to fruition. There's a lot of attention to detail that recruiters need to bring to that entire process. What was the other part of the question again? They're getting greater degree of certainty that the job is going to be filled, which they're not getting on contingency. And I think it creates the right impression in the mind of the candidate that this is a company that takes recruitment seriously.
100%.
Which probably is not a bad thing in terms of their ability to climb on board with this company and take them seriously.
I think that last point I was going to say to you, I mean, that's an all too forgotten thing about if you approach a candidate with a role that you're in control of and you can dictate whether that guy gets interviewed, automatically that role is perceived as the best role because it's more urgent, and it's. I think the whole scope, the whole process is elevated from the client to the consultant to the candidate. If you can get exclusive or retained, I think it's the way to go. But I mean, also I'm not anti.
Conversely, sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but conversely, candidates that get approached about the same job by 2 or 3 different recruiters, which typically happens a lot on contingency. Ever since the internet and job boards, social media, that has just that has gone through the roof. That hardly ever happened in my first 10 or 12 years in the industry when there was no internet. It just hardly ever happened. But when it does, it just sends a very clear signal to that candidate that this is a company that takes a haphazard approach to filling jobs.
Exactly.
And if they're that sloppy in how they hire, what are they going to be like to work for?
I agree. So what pisses you off about the industry?
Are you serious?
Got all day?
How long have we got? Oh, God. Look, the retain thing, I think the future of the industry, or at least the people who are dedicated to being effective practitioners in recruitment, they have to work some kind of exclusivity retain model.
Totally agree.
I don't think it's possible to become anything more than a spot trader of CVs and people and candidates if you're working on contingency. Now, it's a perfectly valid way for people to cut their teeth when they first come into the industry.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But I think there are other ways in which we could bring new people into the sector that I don't think are explored enough. But so contingency will always have its place. I'm not down on contingency.
No.
It has its place,
course,
and it works. It works better in certain job disciplines and certain sectors than it does others.
Yeah.
But it has no future for anyone who considers themselves to be a good recruiter or who has ambitions to be a very good recruiter and has decided that this is their career.
Yeah.
I just don't see, because if nothing else, having to continually hustle, it grinds you down. It wears you out. And as you get older and you take on a mortgage and a spouse and you have kids and more responsibilities, you start wanting a little bit more predictability. I mean, I used to love contingency because I love the thrill of it all.
Yeah.
I didn't know where my money was coming from. And I was a single guy.
Yeah.
I was spending too much money on alcohol and going out and, all that other stuff that we do in our late 20s, early 30s. And I loved it. It fitted with my lifestyle. And being, as I've only recently found out, I spent all my life being ADHD. It worked.
Right.
It worked for me, and I suspect it works for a lot of people. But it's not sustainable.
No,
I don't think it is.
No, I want to talk to you about that, your ADHD, the burnout, the alcohol kind of thing as well, and a bit more about your journey. But you mentioned that attraction and assessment are two of the most fundamental things in recruitment, and this is a point that I love around. I think where recruitment consultants go wrong, they'll qualify a job spec, right? And consultant A will go to the job board, consultant B will go to the database, consultant C will write an advert, and every single person will do something completely different. For me, there's too many gaps in that process, and having a harmonious, structured process that everyone follows. You don't want to create 25 mini-me's, but in fact, you do have to have a rigid process. And I think I'm all for getting new ops tools as well, but I think half the time recruitment consultants don't use what's in front of them in the right way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it makes more sense for one person to do all those things quite well than 4 or 5 different people to do them at varying degrees of competency. Look, I also think companies don't do themselves a lot of favors. I think a lot of them could fill more of their own jobs if they just sat down and thought about it for half an hour.
Absolutely. Yes.
Rather than just knee-jerking stuff out to either their HR function or external agencies or both, which is even worse.
But making the system work for you as well, like forgetting or not putting an advert on in the right way or not doing the right Boolean searches, all that kind of stuff. It's just getting that process right. That's the attraction piece. But tell the audience and myself, like, how do you assess people then, yourself personally?
Okay. Right. Look, my one caveat here is I'm no expert in interviewing people.
I'm sure you are.
I'm not. I'm really not. I mean, I'm not a mug either, but, one of the things that I do when recruiting is I kind of downplay myself when it comes to the candidates. So I never big myself up.
Okay.
I always kind of present myself, look, I'm just the facilitator here. My job is to get you in a room with somebody who may have something to offer you that you want, and vice versa.
Yes.
And, a crude analogy that that sums up what we do as recruiters is we put people in bedrooms, and those people decide if they want to go to bed with each other. But our job is to put people in rooms. So my approach to assessing a candidate is when I took the brief, I will have asked the hiring manager, what are the 2 or 3 absolutely fundamental must-have criteria that this candidate's got to have?
Sure.
Whatever they are, and I don't let them give me more than 3 unless it's absolutely essential.
Oh, it's a shopping list, isn't it?
Yeah, most of it's bullshit. degree, Excel, Word.
That's another point, isn't it? You must have a degree. I mean, I think that's a dying breed.
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
12 years experience. Yeah, it's bonkers.
Yeah.
But yeah, and most of the time they play ball. And rarely have I gone to market with more than 3 must-have criteria. And those must-have criteria are all skills and knowledge based. What do they need to know? What do they need to be good at doing? What does their experience need to show? Never get involved in soft skills, personality, character.
Oh, really? Right.
No, it's too hard to measure.
So you wouldn't go down that road. That's very interesting.
No,
I'll challenge that. I feel that a lot of the reasons why people or companies hire on skills and experience, and they'll fire on behaviours and attitude. And actually, they need to get the first bit first, and the other bit is an added bonus as well.
I'm not saying that work ethic, character, ability to deal with adversity, all those sort of soft skills, ability to, persuade people, manage people, get people to do what's got to be done, all of those kind of soft skills.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're not important. I just don't think I'm qualified to assess people as to their effectiveness in any of those areas.
Right.
I think the client is far better placed to assess that than me. My job is to put people in a bedroom with them who should be there.
I do agree.
So it's, can they do the job?
Yeah.
Here's my criteria. Do they have the knowledge necessary to be able to do the job? That's relatively straightforward to find out. And some of it I can do before I even meet them.
Yeah.
Does it make sense for them to do this job? Logistically,
right?
Financially?
Yeah.
And that's it. And if those boxes get ticked, they're justifiably on the shortlist.
An interesting one. I think you're right in terms of maybe things like engineering and development. I think that's right. But when you're kind of running a project or doing something quite like a program director type role, you're going to have more people management skills, and I think certain styles of leadership is important. But I guess it is situation dependent to an extent. Yeah.
Look, if your recruitment experience has helped you accrue knowledge of leadership and leadership styles, then why wouldn't you include that in how you assess people if it's an important part of the types of people you need to recruit? But other than sort of long-term projects that I've got involved in with certain clients, where I have started to hire people on culture fit.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of people are they? Yeah. Do they like football and beer? If they're in the sales floor of a particular, then that gets factored in, obviously.
I coach quite a lot of leaders, and normally the usual thing where they go wrong is their own kind of like inability to grasp the soft skills. Actually, I think particularly these days, the archetypal recruitment consultant is different to what they were 5 or 6 years ago. I think the average tenure for a recruitment consultant is 1.4 years.
Is it?
Why do you think that's the case? Have you got any ideas about that? I've got my opinions.
Right. I need a little bit more information about that stat. It's the average length of time they stay in a job is 1.5 years, basically. Yeah.
And I think the average in general, I think it's sort of a 3-year thing now. I think the permanency of a role is kind of waning. I don't think there's not really many permanent jobs these days, right?
Yeah, maybe. I haven't really thought about it, actually.
Okay.
I haven't really thought about it. Why is it a year? I think, I don't know. I'm guessing off the top of my head, I think there's much easier availability of new jobs. So it's much easier to have jobs just appear in front of you while you're doing something else.
Yeah.
Which pre-internet, you had to physically go out and buy a certain trade journal or a certain newspaper on a certain day and look at the appointment section or look at the the situations vacant column.
Yeah.
But social media has become that new intrusive medium that radio and TV used to be.
I think with recruitment specifically, though, I think it's all about where's your next deal coming from, how good's your next month, close the deal, and I think it's the short termism of the mindset around that, and I think that leads to burnout and disillusionment. I think that there's the lack of kind of playing the long game a little bit about development and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, do you know? I'd be interested to know what the average tenure of a recruiter was 10, 15, 20 years ago, whether it was any different, whether it was longer.
Might be worse, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hazard a guess that, I don't know, actually. I don't know. I think one of the causes of that may be that I think a lot of recruitment agencies have struggled to deal with the advent of digital tech in general, social media in particular, the democratization of candidate information.
Sure.
Now anybody with the inclination of the time can go find people.
Yes.
Finding people's easy.
Yes.
If you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Persuading them to do something is the hard bit, which is plays back to my copywriting training. But it is, that's the tricky bit. So I think, and what that's produced is a massive spike in the amount of companies that are bringing on board their own recruiters.
Yeah.
So you've got in-house recruitment teams have just grown. And I remember predicting this on forums 20 years ago, because I've been getting into arguments with people on online forums for a long time.
I'm going to talk to you about that as well.
Which so I didn't just turn up and was naturally good at using LinkedIn. I'd had a lot of practice and been punched in the face a few times, which is how you learn. So, but I remember predicting this years and years ago, and you know, I got rubbish as being an agency hater and blah blah blah. But I said it's got to. You know, when Monster first came along, and I saw the whole job board thing. You know, and agencies really only survive because HR people are so bad at recruiting.
True.
But you know, the rise of corporate recruitment teams has taken so much food off the agency table.
It has.
And I think that's created a form of dystopia in the agency world and I think a lot of them have struggled and have floundered a little bit. And I think that's contributed towards
I totally agree. I completely disagree with recruiters who say that in-house people are washed up recruiters. If anything, the in-house role can be more sophisticated and there's a lot more to it, I think, sometimes than...
I worked in-house for 4 years,
right.
So I've walked the carpet, and I learned a lot. Probably in the first 2 years I did that, in the 4 years I did it, the first 2 years, I probably learned more in those 2 years than I did in the first 10.
But you've got to manage up, manage down, manage sideways, manage the recruiter.
I mean, it opened my eyes to why there are agencies.
Yeah.
Because the attitude towards recruitment,
sure,
because I was only working in large corporates,
yes,
back then. And I won't mention the names of the companies just because some of them I'll want to be quite scathing about. But the most hiring managers that I've met, where I've been walking in the building every day, they really dislike recruiting, having to fill jobs.
But they desperately want us to help them because they can't do it themselves.
Yeah, but they treat recruiters like shit.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, which you don't necessarily get into, but they certainly at best they're holding them at arm's length.
I agree.
So they're not giving them the ammunition they need to be able to do a decent job for them. And they think, well, if I get 3 or 4 to run around for me, you know, one of them will get lucky. HR people, don't get me started on HR people when it comes to recruitment. I don't think recruitment should sit in HR. Really, until someone's hired, then it can double back to HR. But I think it should sit in sales and marketing.
I agree. I think there used to be this concept of candidates and even recruiters having a sense of self-entitlement, i.e. candidates expecting certain things. But I think the hiring managers and the employees, there's such a sense of entitlement where, you know, even recruitment companies, they expect the old adage, I want that person to run through a brick wall for me. I think that's bollocks. I think but in a good way, I think it's turning, isn't it?
I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting people to do that if you're a very, very good manager. But how many great managers are there anymore?
Not enough.
Most people have had to become subject matter experts.
Yeah.
You know, and again, because I'm old enough to remember the pre-internet days, you know, I was a sales recruiter. When I first came into recruitment, I recruited salespeople and sales managers.
Sure.
And I'd been a very successful salesperson and sales manager prior to coming into recruitment.
Yes.
For 6 years, 7 years. So I had a little bit of an insight, which helped get me started. But, you know, people had to manage people back then.
Of course. Management
was a definable skill. I hardly ever see the ability to manage people ever described in job ads or job descriptions anymore.
Oh, I mean, that's why it falls down, isn't it? They might have the right skill set, but if they're not being managed or led. You mentioned sales and marketing. I want to touch on this point because I think, again, another misconception in my eyes is that, you know, sales is the most important thing. I think marketing is playing branding, personal branding, playing a much more bigger part in our lives. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. It's certainly playing a much bigger part in everyone's lives. I only see it through the prism of recruitment.
Yeah.
And appreciate there's a lot of other stuff going on outside of recruitment in terms of, you know, the whole influencer marketing and what personal branding means to different types of people. Personal branding becomes an issue for people who are employed.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm just saying it's an issue. A lot of companies, you know, have got a bit of a stranglehold over how people can communicate publicly. particularly the larger the company, the tighter the stranglehold generally.
Yeah.
So people aren't given too much freedom in terms of what they talk about, how they talk about it online.
Yes.
And that includes recruiters, which is a shame, actually.
What's your thoughts on kind of LinkedIn? Because it is about personal brand even more so. There's a lot of video stuff going on. You have to be human. You have to, going on the binary corporate kind of images of people with their logo behind them and all that kind of stuff. How are you adapting to that? What's your thoughts on it?
How have I adapted? It's been easy because I don't report to anyone. I do what the hell I like, and I'll learn from my own mistakes. And I've sailed close to the wind a few times, as is widely known.
Yes.
But look, for me, my golden rule with social media, and I think this would be good advice for most people, is, being a good writer, writing things that people want to read, takes time to develop. It took me years to get good at it.
It's a skill.
Yeah. And it takes practice. Nobody, you can have some natural ability, and I must have had a little bit, but I just worked at it. I read books. I didn't get any formal training. It's only through working with Jackie that I've actually become more of a technician when it comes to advertising in general and understanding the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
But, what I've brought to my content is knowledge and authority over certain subjects. So I don't form two opinions that are too strong about things that I don't have a direct understanding and knowledge of. So I play safe in that respect. My content is always peppered with humor.
It is.
Or as you called it, piss taking.
Satire.
Well, we can, banter semantics all day, but it's humor. It's taking and that makes the content more palatable. But the one golden rule that I have is I never, ever say anything, even if it's a sarcastic piss take or an off-the-cuff kind of remark. I'll never post anything that I cannot back up.
Right. Yeah, well, that's good.
I would urge everyone to free themselves up, but just say what you like, but make sure you can back it up if someone challenges you.
I mean, when I first saw you on LinkedIn, I was originally kind of like, who the fuck's this guy? This is a bit much. And now I love it because I know it took me a while to get it. And I think now I love it. And a lot of people, you probably still get that now. But talk to us, what's been your first or second most controversial posts?
Well, the one that everyone keeps coming back to is the post I made about Hayes, which I talked about on that other podcast a few years back, which I don't necessarily want to get into the nitty gritty of that anymore. But yeah, it was a joke because it incorporated the Nazi party. It got a lot of heat, which I felt was a bit stupid because people were adding dots to join up so that they could get offended.
Jumping on the bandwagon.
Some people were doing that as well. Yeah. To be fair, there were quite a few recruiters who stood in front of the storm and said, hang on a minute, this is, And I'll remember a lot of who those people were because it took some bravery to do that because it was a firestorm for a couple of days. But I was lucky in so much as I came out of that even better than I beforehand because my follower numbers went up. Not connections, because there's a difference between connections.
Sure.
I only have 13,000 connections on LinkedIn, but my follower count is 45,000.
Yes,
so there's a lot of people have decided they want to follow me, rather than, and I think now people see the follower number and think, oh, he's already got 30,000 connections. It's pointless connecting with him. But actually, it's not true. If you want to connect with me, guys, hit the connect button because I've still got a long way to go to reach 30.
Fair play.
But my follower count in 3 days went up by 1,400 people. Now, some of them would be ambulance chasers thinking, oh, what other bullshit is this guy going to create? But and I think it was a joke. The joke I made, a lot of people resonated with it. And for jokes to be funny, they have to have some root in the truth.
Sure.
And what I said had some root in the truth.
So there's more recruitment questions I want to ask you, but let's get under the bonnet of the real Mitch. You talked about ADHD. You talked about alcohol. Paint us a picture about mental health, anxiety, adversity.
Okay. Look, right. First of all, I was typical of a lot of men in their 20s who were single and who went through periods of earning more money than they probably deserved to be making, which I did. You know, I remember going out one lunchtime in 1989 to buy a sandwich, coming back with a Hugo Boss suit, cost 500 quid, which in 1990 was
a lot of money.
Stupid amount of money.
Yeah.
So I was reckless with money. I was a little bit reckless with how I socialized. I've never been an alcoholic. I hardly ever drink and haven't really drank that much for 10, 15 years. Yeah. But I can, even now, you know, drink an awful lot over a 6-7 hour period, but then not touch another drop for a month or 2 months or even longer. So the alcohol was always a means to an end in terms of altering my state, you know, making other people a bit more bearable, blah, blah, which is part of the ADHD thing. Look, throughout my whole life, ADHD was, you know, it was undiagnosed. People, I only knew what it was 3 years ago.
Sure.
And I've only come to learn a little bit more about it through my daughter.
Okay.
Who is in the business of neurodivergency.
Right.
And I don't want to talk about her or get into any detail about her because that wouldn't be right or fair. But it's only through trying to help her through some of her struggles that I've realized, because she's my daughter and she is so like me in so many ways.
Right, okay.
And it made me realize, my God, it's made me reevaluate my whole life, because I've looked back and so many instances in my life where I've realized, wow, that's why I acted that way, or that's why I responded to things in that way, or that's why I just thought I was an idiot. It turns out, you know, I was an idiot sometimes, obviously, but it turns out that my brain works in a certain way, which is very similar to how my daughter's brain works.
See, knowing that now, I mean, it must have almost been a relief in a way, because
it's too late. It was too late. Yeah, I've become very comfortable with who I am over the last 10 years.
Right.
And that's just a function of age. It's just experience.
Yes, indeed.
And so whilst I live with a lot of regrets, I mean, I'm divorced. You know, when anyone that goes through a divorce, particularly if there's kids involved, it's just one of the most painful things you can experience.
I've been through that myself.
And I still, it causes me a lot of anguish just thinking back to it. So, but yeah, I just, the last couple of years, I've had to look back over my life and re-examine periods of my life. I think, right, now I'm starting to understand why that happened the way it did more clearly now than I did at the time.
Sure.
At the time, I just felt like a ball in a pinball machine sometimes.
Yes. I agree.
So I don't dwell on it too much.
I think sometimes though, I'm all for kind of looking forward, but sometimes you do have to go back. You do have to go inward before you can go forward again. And I think that you know, I think sometimes in recruitment, we're so transfixed into the next deal or business that we forget some of these softer skills and the empathy, understanding, and looking inward. I think this is called the Purpose-Led Leadership Podcast. And my purpose now is completely different to what it was when I was running a big business. And I'm much happier now.
Yeah.
I'm more rich in fulfillment and purpose than I am financially. I wouldn't trade what I am now for what I was back then. And I get the sense you've got the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Look, the social media has been a great thing for me. It's played to my strengths, some of which were created by my ADHD, you know, which were, you know, looking back, always been a big picture guy, never been particularly great at detail. Sometimes have tremendous problems switching my head off.
Right.
Literally, I can't stop my brain. You know, that had negative effects on my sleeping patterns because I literally just couldn't stop thinking. And I know that my daughter suffers from that sometimes as well. Just all or nothing. I've always had a very all or nothing personality where I'm all in, or it's you know, and I've kind of always preached to my kids that if you're going to do something, you have to give it your all. You have to try your hardest, or just don't bother. Or if you start something and think, well, maybe this is not for me, then quit.
Get out.
Exactly. So, it's I you know, I haven't gone into it. I've only examined this part of who I am because of my daughter. I'm not too interested in doing a complete relitigation of my life because
No.
I don't see any point. But
No.
some of it's made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And so look, social media now has given me the ability to express my thoughts, get feedback on some of those thoughts.
An outlet almost.
Yeah.
Have you had therapy or anything like that? Counselling or?
Wow, we're getting deep here, aren't we?
I mean, it's a normal thing these days, no?
I did for a while when I was going through, when my marriage was breaking down, and I was throwing too many stimulants into my body at the time as a coping mechanism. But I didn't do it for that long.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I thought the guy was a bit of a hack. But yeah, I just thought, no, I can work through this stuff myself. So yeah, I tried that. Didn't really work for me. I'm a little bit too bullheaded, perhaps.
I think it's a journey that we go on. And I think we've all got mental health. I'm a mental health first aider, mental health advocate, and I've been very vocal on LinkedIn about some of the struggles that I've had. And I think when we start having these discussions, I think it's a strength. And a lot of people think whatever, but for me, this is how you win clients as well. Not just in its relationships. This is another level of kind of connection for me. This is
I think we're learning more about ourselves. The world has changed so dramatically just in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
I remember thinking, I used to look at my grandparents when I was young and think, wow, they've gone through so much change in their lifetimes.
Yeah.
Airplanes, TV, radio, one world war, not two, but just seismic stuff. You think, wow, that'll never happen again. But in a different way, the world just in the last 30, 40 years has just been turned on its head. COVID is going to have an impact on all of us.
Oh my God, the aftermath of that
we can't predict yet. The next 10 years that'll roll out. Work from home is going to change the patterns of how we do things. Social media, the abuse of social media, how that gets policed, managed.
Sure.
And by abuse, I'm talking, at its most seismic level is, the Trumps of this world. And the disinformation and the bullshit and the lies and the freedom of speech. How do you manage that? How we regulate the internet, I think, is one of the big societal questions that we have to find answers to.
We've got Elon Musk at Twitter now, haven't we? That'll be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
What's your proudest moment so far, Mitch?
Breaking the course record at golf.
That is
at
a
my
proud
local
moment.
club when I was 22 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
Yeah, in terms of the physical feeling I had inside my body when I did it, and it stayed with me for quite a while afterwards, and there being a plaque in the clubhouse.
Right.
I used to play golf, as this is now obvious. I didn't start till I was 18, and I got down to full handicap by the time I was 22.
Wow.
I even toyed around with maybe could I turn pro? And back then, 4, maybe getting down to 3, I might have been on the verge of playing for the county, which wouldn't have been a big thing.
Yeah.
But then I lost my driving license through drink driving.
Right.
Lost my job, didn't have any money, and I had to quit golf for 2 or 3 years. So but and it's funny, this kind of doubles back to the ADHD thing actually, because when I was playing between the age of getting better and better at golf and getting down to that lower handicap, my temperament was awful. I mean, I used to lose my temper on the golf course really badly. I used to snap clubs over my knee, scream, shout, throw clubs. And it became something of a running joke. And I was hauled up in front of the committee at the golf club 2 or 3 times. And they would implore me to just try and calm down. They said, you can be so utterly charming. Yeah. And then you have these red mist moments. And looking back again, that was an ADHD coming out. And I was lucky that I found golf because it's a very individual sport. There's no one else or nothing else you can blame other than yourself if things don't work.
Yes.
And it forced me, because I wanted to be good at golf and I wanted to be effective as a good amateur player.
Yeah.
And as I grew up, I worked at it, and I thought I've got to stop losing my temper. I've got to stop seeing red when I make double bogey on the first hole.
So it's the sense of achievement of winning the tournament, but also to curtail your
It wasn't even winning the tournament. I just wanted to be capable. And here was the defining thing. I needed to learn, and I did. I needed to learn how to get around a golf course in under 80 while I was playing rubbish.
Right.
If I was hitting the ball bad,
sure.
Back when I was younger, I would have shot 90.
Yeah.
But I learned how to be able to still shoot 77 or 78 whilst playing not very well. So and that for me was a sign that I was maturing. And it helped smooth some of the rough edges off me as a person, because I took some of those lessons into life as well.
Love that answer. I mean, that was 20, 25 years ago. Moving forward,
longer. Actually, I'm older than you think.
I was trying to be kind. What's your purpose, would you say?
Purpose? I'm not big into grand statements like that. Actually, I want my business to be successful, the copywriting business to be successful. I think it's important. I'm looking forward to some serious competition coming into that particular training market. That will tell me that more and more people are taking it seriously at the moment.
But why are you doing? I'll ask the question differently. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the reason for doing it apart from paying the bills? Is there a more bigger reason than that, or not? Is it to give something back to the sector? Is it to? Have you thought about that?
Look, I wouldn't be able to do what I do with the amount of gusto that I sometimes bring to it if I didn't believe in it, obviously. I've thought about it a lot. I think about a lot of things a lot. That's just.
But you're also bloody good at it, right?
Well, I don't have much competition at the moment in terms of teaching people how to write good copy within the world of recruitment. I mean, it's niche. Yeah, there's tons of copywriters out there, millions of them. There's lots of copywriting trainers out there, but there's nothing currently, or very little in the world that is specifically geared around recruitment.
Without being too disparaging to other recruiters, you're uncharacteristically humble, I'd say.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Anyway, look, my purpose is to make money, put some aside so my kids have got something to soften some of the blows they're going to experience as they get older.
Okay.
So that's probably my biggest motivation is to make their life a little bit easier as they get older.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was going to ask you what kind of gets you out of bed in the morning and what keeps you up at night. So what kind of
5 o'clock gets me out of bed in the night. I'm
really?
up at 5
early
every
starter?
Single day.
What do you do?
Sundays.
What do you do in the mornings? You got routine, or you just
depends what my diary looks like, but invariably it's a couple of cups of tea, look at LinkedIn, read some of the reactions people have made to some of the things I might have said the day before. I believe it or not, I read probably 20 times more than I post on places like LinkedIn.
Yes. Didn't you have a period where you were off LinkedIn for a while?
No.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
I don't post as often as I used to.
Right.
I used to be fairly almost every day I'd post something.
Yeah.
These days it's a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
But then it tends to be driven more by if something comes to me. A lot of it's still off the cuff. I might read something that somebody posts and it'll spark a reaction.
Yeah.
A lot of my posts on LinkedIn have been created where I've started to type out a response as a comment.
Yeah.
And as I'm typing, I think, whoa, this is too good. This is too good. So I've cut and pasted it into a Word document, and then I'll put some work into it.
So in terms of like, do you find that people misunderstand you quite a lot because of the way that you write your content? But in a way, you get more followers by doing that, right?
Look, I probably going to have to ask other people. It's difficult for me to second guess. I suspect probably a lot of people think I'm grumpier and more miserable than I really am. They, probably think, oh yeah, he can be a bit negative, which is true. I'm a glass half empty kind of person. Whenever I look at any situation, the first thing I look for is the flaws.
Right. Okay.
When I smell flowers, I look around for a coffin. Yeah, I'm just one of those types of people.
Fair enough.
That doesn't mean I want to get down on everything or be negative. It's just that my instinct is to look for things that might go wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So we're kind of coming towards the end of this. It's been fascinating. Just talk to us about kind of like, we've all made mistakes. I've made some big mistakes. What's been your biggest mistake or poor decision, would you say?
I mean, there are some that are going to be too personal for me to want to reveal here. I've made loads. I wouldn't say I've made any, that I can think of right now that have been massive or seismic or life-changing.
Yeah.
It's been more a question of lots of sort of medium-sized mistakes. But I look back on, I lived in Switzerland for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
I started a business over there, recruitment business.
Okay.
That's when the whole retained and advertised thing started to really take shape.
Yeah.
I learned a lot, but I was in, a very small market, and I often look back on those years as me giving my best years to what essentially was a commercial backwater.
Sure.
And wondered how much more I could have achieved had I been in the UK between 1996 and 2005. Because those were my peak years. In terms of, youthfulness, energy, knowledge, all kind of coming together, or starting to come together. Probably my peak years were my 40s, probably. And I think they probably are for a lot of people, actually, because it's where wisdom meets energy.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And as you get older, as you go past 40 and into your 50s and beyond, the energy levels start to. The wisdom doesn't go anywhere, but the energy levels start to decrease a little bit. Yeah.
At this age, you're kind of old enough to do whatever you want, but young enough to still, recover, that kind of stuff.
So I think everything that I've done, good and bad, has contributed to me being in the position I am in now, which is relatively comfortable.
Okay.
In terms of my own sense of self. I don't beat myself up as much as I used to.
That's good.
I've got a great partner who has made my life so much easier.
Yes.
Who I've been with now for 15 odd years now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's great.
I've got 2 great kids who are just enormous love and respect for.
Yeah.
Who are both wildly different. I've even got a good relationship with my ex-wife, which is incredibly satisfying as well.
Well, that's good.
So, it's all a journey. And whilst I haven't reached any kind of nirvana, I'm relatively comfortable with where I've got to compared to where I was, say, 20 years ago.
I mean, having built a big business myself, I'm now a solopreneur. I don't have any people working for me. I've got like suppliers and things like that. And I love the flexibility and freedom of that.
Yeah.
Almost will kind of like never go back. And I feel that, it will take a lot of money for me to be offered to go back into that kind of environment. And I'm not sure why that is. I just talk to us about that kind of like, because some people struggle with the whole solopreneur being completely on their own, but I think you and I are quite similar. I kind of enjoy that flexibility. Yeah,
look, I opted out of the employed work market when I was 32, 33. So I was young.
Yeah.
Looking back, I was relatively unemployable because I was too headstrong.
Yeah.
I was too difficult to manage. I mean, I've had a couple of great managers in my life, and looking back, they were exceptional managers to get the best out of me. Because I was capable of producing great results, both before I came into recruitment and since. But could be a bit of a loose cannon, a little bit unpredictable. So I've that's really the only life I've ever known. It's me, and I have to make a living. And at times I found it incredibly tough.
Do you do any in-person stuff? Do you go to any? Is it all kind of remote stuff that you do? Or?
Well, I'm not the best networker in the world, but networking these days is much easier because of social media. Because people go, "Oh, it's Mitch Sullivan," so that helps.
Yes,
obviously.
absolutely.
So it means I don't have to initiate conversations and introduce myself, which I was never particularly good at. So yeah.
Okay. What are the out-of-date things recruitment agencies do versus what they should be doing now? Do you think?
Out-of-date things.
Yeah.
Posting job descriptions. It used to work back in the mid 2000s. It worked because it was quick. It got results because candidates were grateful for the fact they could find jobs really quickly on a job board. Yeah, and they could respond to it quickly via email, with an electronic CV. And so it worked, but it's just gradually worked less and less as time goes on. So look, in the part of the recruitment ecosystem that I inhabit, that's the biggest problem that I see. But for me, the most fundamental is the contingency model. It's got to be adapted. I think there's more culpability has to be laid at the feet of the clients. For the recruitment system to work better.
Are most of your clients the more senior recruiters as opposed to trainees and rookies? Is that right?
No, there's no
distinction
across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the best in terms of outcome or output. Immediately after the training. Some of the best recruiters had been in the industry 6 months.
Yes, sir.
So with those people, there was practically nothing to unpack.
Yeah, they're not tarnished with a bad brush, right?
Yeah, and what I've noticed with some, not all, but with some older, more experienced recruiters, they get locked into certain habits, grammatical habits, ways of expressing things. Certain, I call them grammatical tics. It's almost they're writing them without even realizing.
Right.
And then it's only through when I do these and I've done hundreds of these one-to-one coaching sessions with recruiters where they'll send me an ad they've written, and we'll go through it and dissect it, almost line by line. And I'll explain why that needs to be deleted and why that works and where it should, which part of the ad it should be. And them getting out of those habits takes a little bit of effort.
I agree. What advice would you give to rookies or new people entering the sector?
Recruitment, writing advice or recruitment advice?
In general, actually.
God, that's a big question. Let me narrow it down. When they're in front of a keyboard and they're typing out, writing a blog, sending a message to a candidate, writing a job ad, writing an email, writing a social media post, write as you would speak.
Absolutely.
Write down what you want to say, then go through it line by line and keep asking yourself, so what? So what? What does this mean to the reader?
Yeah.
Is this going to mean anything to them? Yeah. Are they going to want to keep reading as a result of reading this sentence? Are they going to want to read the next sentence? And put it in language that's nice and simple and straightforward. And that means not using words like facilitate and using the word help. Yeah.
Okay. I agree with that. If you look at 100 recruitment websites, say, and 100 recruitment kind of work for us pages, 99.
Yeah, they all sound the same.
Say the same.
Yeah.
So, I mean, doesn't that?
I think
really,
they all copy each other. I think
100%.
they go, right, we need a careers page. Yeah. And they go, right, let's have a look and see what other agencies are saying
as well,
so we get a sense of what we need to do.
Yeah.
Very few people are brave enough to want to stand out. I think when you're running a contingency, an agency that's predominantly contingency, it does get quite hard to say anything that's tangibly different.
Yeah.
But they could say it in a different way, and too many of them aren't prepared to do that or don't know how to. But if social media has done one thing that's brilliant in my view, is it's made it far more acceptable and mainstream for language to be more conversational and more colloquial. So that kind of stiff formality that a lot of recruitment comms used to have is slowly being eroded, which I think is a great thing.
Okay. You mentioned work from anywhere, work from home. How do you feel that's going to or has affected recruitment in general? I believe that a blend of the two is the utopia. What do you think? Yeah, look,
I think it's made an already complicated arena more complicated.
Yeah.
Which is not a good thing.
No.
How are we going to train trainees? You can't do that from home.
No.
It's much, much harder. It's a big question. But yeah, look, it's complicated. It's going to suit some people and some job disciplines and some companies more than it is others.
Yeah.
And everyone's got to find their own little sweet spot, wherever that may be.
It's been absolutely fascinating. Before we go, a couple more questions.
You've been saying this last 20 minutes.
I know, it's one of the tricks of mine. Is recruitment that bad compared to other sectors? We get a lot of flack, right? But actually, I think, there's a certain percentage of the recruitment community that have an enormous amount of emotional intelligence because we're dealing with people. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I've got respect for anyone who's done at least 6, 7, 8 years in the business and is still in it, because it takes a certain amount of fortitude and stickability,
definitely, and
resilience, and a small there's some skill in terms of but but one of the things about recruiters that pisses me off, something's just occurred to me, is they'll overinflate their role sometimes. Is to talk about the use for extra, like finding people their dream job, top talent, best in the market, and changing people's lives. I wrote a blog about that once. I think, what the fuck? Seriously? You're not changing. I mean, the candidate's changing their life, not you. All you're doing is opening a door through which, if they decide to walk, they're doing the hard work. They're doing the walking.
Right.
Not you.
Sure. So you're not a fan of the virtual signaling around?
No, I'm not. I mean, and I think if you do recruitment well, it can be an incredibly well-paid job. It can be very rewarding on lots of levels, not least financially. But start bestowing upon yourself some kind of social significance. That kind of
But do you not necessarily get fulfillment out of placing somebody in a role apart from?
Yeah, of course. Somebody rings you up and say, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And you're one of the best recruiters or the best recruiter I've ever worked with. I remember the first time I heard that as a woman, and I even remember her name, which I'm not going to mention here, but she said, you're right up there with one of the best recruiters I've ever worked with. And I was just about old enough then to sprinkle some salt on that and go, yeah, okay. But you've just landed a great job with a
go to your
big
head?
company. No, exactly. I didn't.
What's your thoughts on this kind of I'm an archetypal, 360 recruiter. I did it all my bloody self, maybe because I was too controlling. And then I did have a team of resources and people helping me in the end. But this whole kind of 90, 180, 270, 4,000 people doing all these things for one job. I'm quite anti it, but I do get it in certain contexts. What's your view on that?
I'm a little bit biased because when I came into the industry, the different parts of the job were segregated. So my first ever job in recruitment, believe it or not, was as a manager. I was managing recruiters.
Yeah.
It was a sales recruitment office. It was for a PLC company at the time. I opened their first ever London office. They had 14 or 15 other offices throughout the country. And I had 3 recruiters.
Yeah.
2 of the one whose job it was simply to deal with candidates all day long and meet them and register them. Because back then you had to register candidates formally.
Of course.
Before you were allowed to send them out of an interview.
Yes.
And if you were caught not registering a candidate physically face to face, the DOE could shut you down.
Right.
And then there were 2 others whose job it was purely to make phone calls to bring jobs into the business. And my job was to close that business. Mm-hmm. So once the candidate and the job had been put together, my job was then to call the client and to manage the process. So everybody was doing a different part of the process. So I have a natural tendency towards seeing the benefits of that. Mm-hmm. I've got a client that I work with, an agency who have a similar model. So the sales and marketing is centralized.
Right.
Meaning it's automated, it's inbound.
Yes.
And they're just starting to make that work, isn't it? And the recruiters, their job purely is to attend the intake meeting with the client. They don't work contingency either. So they're not competing with other agencies. And their job is purely to understand the job, sit behind the right marketing, which they're not responsible for themselves, manage resources whose job is to build the Boolean stuff and to search. And then to respond to those candidates that show an interest.
This is where a good leader,
pure delivery,
a good recruitment manager or leader will understand the strengths and weaknesses of an individual and put them in the right roles. That's why it's important.
I'll tell you why recruitment gets a lot of flack. It gets a lot of flack because even people who are quite good at it are sometimes going to be quite bad at it.
Right.
And that's because being a recruiter asks you to be a little bit good at marketing, sales,
absolutely,
PR, admin, research, management.
Totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be reasonably good at. And I don't know of a human being on the planet who's good at all those things.
Very true.
Some of those things I've just mentioned, I'm awful at.
That's very true.
But some of them I'm pretty good at.
Yeah. It's a rare breed, isn't it? A 360 is a rare breed these days.
So I think, look, I did 360 recruitment as well after that job. And in fact, it helped me develop as a recruiter, having to eat what I could kill, basically.
Absolutely. So on the sort of last question, and then one more after that, I promise. KPIs, what's your view on it? What's important? What's not?
I think KPIs are important, but only so that the people running the business can see what's going on. I don't think they should be set as targets. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you look at the numbers and you use that as the bedrock for training and development and mentoring for each individual recruiter in terms of whatever the numbers are.
I've always said CVs, jobs, interviews are the most important ones.
Sorry, say that again?
CVs, jobs, and interviews. The number of new jobs, number of CVs you're sending, number of interviews you're getting. I think
I mean, CV submissions to interviews is a good stat. Obviously, because that tells you quite a lot about the quality of the work that recruiters
conversion
do.
rates. If you're sending 48 CVs for one interview, then it's something wrong.
Yeah.
Or if you're getting,
but again, that's contingency, and I tend not to look too much at contingency businesses because I'm not that really interested. I only really get involved with agencies that are either working retained or working towards working retained.
Makes sense. So we are now concluding. It's been absolutely fascinating, mate.
Thank you.
If there's one thing you'd like to leave the audience with in terms of a tip, piece of advice in recruitment or copywriting, whatever, what would that be?
Oh my God, you put me on the spot here. Look, this is going to sound corny, but just, keep getting up. when you get punched, and we all get punched and get decked, get up. You have to keep getting up.
Yes.
Yeah. And you have to not take anything personally. And you have to brush the dirt off and keep going. And that sounds incredibly corny. I'm not known for coming out with corny stuff like that. But
I think I should take a photo of that. That's the first time ever, isn't it?
Oh, if that goes viral, I'm moving.
Well, absolutely a great way to end. A fascinating conversation. I could talk to you for a lot longer. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for inviting me.